Thank you. I'm honored to be here, and it's great to see so many familiar faces and some new faces, so thank you very much for coming out. As Heidi mentioned, my name is Tiffany Eddy, and I'm a former broadcast journalist. Some of you might know me from my days at WMUR, where I spent about 14 years. Yes, thank you. It was a wonderful, wonderful part of my life and career, and most recently, I launched a new venture called Smart, Strong, Sassy, which is all about women empowering women through the sharing of our stories. And I personally believe that we are best when we learn from our successes and our failures, and that when we share those with other people, we're not only helping our own journey, but we're helping somebody else on their journey. And so that's how we lift each other up, is by being real and being honest. So I wasn't always able to speak in front of people like this. And to be honest, I'm always a little bit nervous because I don't do public speaking that often. But when I was growing up, I was a really shy, timid kid. I was so afraid to speak. I was that girl that would hide behind my mother because I was afraid of using my voice. And I think for me, I was always afraid of letting other people down. I was afraid of making a mistake. I was afraid of saying something wrong. And I was afraid of letting the people who I love down. So I didn't do a lot out in front. I was always happy to be kind of behind the scenes. And it's tough living in fear. If anybody has any fears, you know that you kind of carry them around with you, and it can be a lot and difficult to overcome. So how did someone who was afraid of speaking in front of other people wind up in TV? Well, it's an interesting journey. So I don't know about entrepreneurship as much, but I do know about my own journey. So I'm going to share my personal story with you, and hopefully there's some lessons learned that will be helpful to you. I wanted to be a National Geographic photographer, and I wanted to travel the world and take pictures and write stories. That was my goal in life. I got a job out of college, and I was working for a video production company in Hartford, Connecticut. And the boss that I had was obsessed with TV news. And every day at noontime, he would go into his office, and he had 3 TVs, those big cube TVs, remember when they were like boxes? And he would put on the new news, and I would go with him, and he would point out like what station led with what story, and how did they do it, and what sort of images did they use, how did they present those stories, how did the reporters use their voice and presentation skills to deliver those stories. And I became absolutely fascinated. So I was inspired to become a broadcast journalist. Now the only problem was I didn't have the TV skills. So I got a job in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I was the administrative assistant to the news director at WGGB, which really meant nothing as far as being on TV. I we didn't even have email back then, but sent letters and answered the phones. And it was like a 20-hour-a-week job, which was minimum wage at that point. I think I was earning maybe $7 an hour, something like that. But I was there 60 hours a week, and I was always asking the reporters if I could go out with them and if they would teach me something. And they were great. And there was one woman in particular, her name was Linda, and she let me go out with her, and she was trying to kind of show me the ropes. Now, she had an opportunity, excuse me, to go to Hartford Bradley International Airport, where they were doing some emergency drills. And she's like, Tiffany, why don't you come with me and we'll see if we can do a stand-up. So for those of you who don't know what a stand-up is when you see a reporter out in the field and they have the microphone and they're saying something like perhaps along the lines of, the women who came to this conference today learned a great deal and they found it very satisfying and said it was a wonderful experience. Tiffany Eddy, WMUR News 9. So easy enough. Yes. Easy enough in theory. So we went to Hartford Bradley, and we were up in this truck with a bunch of firefighters, and she said, Tiffany, why don't you try to do a stand-up? Can you hear me okay back there in the room? Should I go closer? Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Sorry. I'm gonna be like making out with this. So this is my first ever attempt at being on TV, and I brought it here to show you how awful I was.
Alright, today's response teams are here in case of, oh God. Sorry, Deb, I've never done this before. Today's crash simulation is required by the FAA. Today's crash simulation is required by all. 3, 2, 1. Today's crash simulation. 3, 2, 1. Today's mock emergency crash is something that's required by the FAA of all airports to do every 3 years. Say it one more time. 3, 2, 1. Today's mock emergency crash is something the FAA requires of all airports to do every 3 years so that emergency response teams can respond to a crash effectively and immediately. For Newswatch 3, I'm Tiffany Eddy.
So yeah, that was kind of painful. And I remember bringing that back and showing my mother, and she said, you know, are you really sold on this TV thing? Because I always thought you'd make a great lawyer. So it was a very rough start, but I was so mad at myself about that because my heart was racing and I was sweating, and obviously, as you could see, I couldn't spit out my words, and I was terrified that I made a pact with myself that I was going to at least continue to do it until I wasn't scared anymore. And then once I could do it and I could say to myself that I accomplished it, then I could figure out what I wanted to do. But it was really important to me that I overcame that fear. So I ended up going from Springfield and getting a small on-air role in Albany, New York, where I was called the Operations Center Manager. And I was delivering these like 30-second updates during the 11 o'clock news of the NBC affiliate. And it was a little overwhelming because Albany's kind of a big market, and I worked there for about 10 months, and then I got fired. And I was fired not because I was showing up at work drunk or, you know, bad employee, but they basically said, you know, look, Tiffany, you just don't have the skills that we think that you should have to be on air in a market this size. So I was devastated. I had spent so much time trying to get to this level, and I was in tears. So I remember I called my boyfriend at the time. We'd been going out for a couple of years. His name was Stuart, and he was back home in Hartford, Connecticut. And I was like, I got fired from my job. I don't know what to do. I'm coming home. And he said to me, you know, tonight's not a really good night for me. I've got a lot of work I need to do, so why don't we catch up this weekend? So I was like, okay. And again, women have always been my biggest supporters. A woman whose name was Monica basically took me out that night. She was an older reporter. She bought me a lot of drinks. And at the end of the evening, when I was a little bit tipsy, she called a cab, but before she sent me on my way, she said, you are going to go home. You are going to set your alarm for 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. You're gonna get up, you're gonna get your shit together, and you're gonna call every news director in a 100-mile radius of Albany, and you're gonna get another job. So I went home, I did exactly what she said, and within 48 hours, I had another job in Utica, New York, where I was an anchor and a reporter and a producer, and it was a much smaller market and a much better place to learn the ropes without the pressure of a big TV market. So I will never forget that Monica, and some lessons learned. Everybody needs to have a Monica in their life. Monica is that friend. We're not talking about, I was doing this with my daughter last night. She's like, I keep thinking of Friends. And I'm like, well, yes, there is that Monica on Friends, but Monica, or whomever your Monica is that friend who's gonna tell it to you straight. And she's gonna tell you when you need to get your act together, and she's gonna lift you up, and she's going to be real. And we all need to have Monicas in our life. Now, unfortunately, we all have Stuarts in our life too. The moral of the story on Stuart is that we need to mitigate the Stuarts, because the Stuarts are gonna be there and they're gonna pretend to be our friends, or they're gonna pretend to be supportive, but when push comes to shove, they're not going to be there. So just one more footnote on Stuart. I ended up breaking up with him, obviously. Thank God. But when I did, and I had some things at his apartment and I went to go get them, he came out, and I'll never forget this, so ladies, make sure you choose well. He came out and said, I can't believe I wasted my best years with hair on you. Oh. He was bald. I know. I can't believe I wasted my best years with hair on you. I saw him on Facebook a little while ago. He doesn't have hair anymore at all. So eventually I wound my way to WMUR, which was an incredible experience and was like a family. And there were so many wonderful opportunities there. I was able to travel to Rwanda to report on the post-genocide government there, traveled to Cuba to report on the Elian Gonzalez crisis. Had the wonderful opportunity of interviewing some incredible celebrities and really fascinating stories. Traveled throughout New Hampshire for New Hampshire Chronicle, reporting on standout Granite State citizens. And while there were some incredible stories and some important people that I interviewed, I think the most profound interview that I ever did had to do with one early on in my career. I was sent to go interview a woman who had been a victim of domestic violence, and she had decided to press charges against her husband, and he was going to jail, and she wanted to share that story because she was hoping that it would make a difference for other women. And I was the reporter who was sent out to go cover that story. And I remember doing my stand-up, back to the stand-ups, in front of the Merrimack House of Corrections about the fact that she had pressed charges and that he was going to jail. And you put that story out into the universe and you hope for the best. And fast forward 5 years later, and I'm having lunch at Fratello's in Manchester, New Hampshire with a friend, and the waitress is acting really weird. And she's like nervous around me. And the person I was having lunch with was saying, "What did you do to this woman?" And I was like, "I don't know, I've never seen her before in my life, I have no idea." And at the end of lunch, she said, "Tiffany Eddy." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I want to thank you." "Why do you want to thank me? I should be thanking you." She said, "Years ago, you told a story about a woman who had been abused and got out of that situation." And she said, "That was me, and that was my life. And when I saw that story, it gave me the courage to get out of my situation. And today I don't live in fear, so thank you." And that was probably the most profound moment of my entire professional career, one of the best moments of I think, my life, to know that you told a story that changed the trajectory of someone's life for the better. It was just the most incredible feeling. And it wasn't my story, it was me just being a conduit to somebody else's story, but it really, in my mind, solidified the fact that stories have power and stories can be transformative and stories can change people's lives. So while the stories were wonderful at WMUR, and I loved working there and I loved telling stories, there were some stories that I was missing at home. And anybody who's a mom or a parent knows that childhood is fleeting and wonderful and beautiful, and my kids are wonderful, amazing kids, but they were getting home off the bus at 2:30 in the afternoon, and I was leaving at 2 o'clock every day, Monday through Friday, and not getting home until midnight. So we were basically passing each other, missing each other by a half hour. And I would get up early in the morning and try to get them off onto the bus, but it was killing me inside. And again, they grow up so quickly. So that was them like this week. And they are the center of my universe, and I am very, very lucky. So I left and I decided to start my own PR firm. Oh, I got a little ahead of myself there with Smart, Strong, Sassy. But after being at Channel 9 for 14 years, I decided it was time to try to do something where I could be the mom that I wanted to be with my kids. So I left and I decided to start a PR firm, and I was trying to figure out, what do I name this firm? And some people are saying, your name is your brand, you should name it Tiffany Eddy or something around your name. And other people said, I think you should be more international and you just should do something more creative. So I went with the creative because I was like, oh, international sounds fabulous, that's me. So I named my company Focus First Communications, because we focus first on the messaging for your communications. Sounds great, right? Nobody could get the name right. Everyone's like, first focus communication, first something. So long story short, but I was being honored by the governor and the Department of Safety for some work that the company had done on the Texting While Driving campaign. And the governor was there with a citation, and all the troopers were there in their uniforms, and it was a big honor. And they gave me this wonderful plaque to thank me for my service, and it was to First Focus Communications. And I was like, all right, so I'm gonna change the name to Tiffany Eddy and Associates. So the moral of that story, always keep it simple. Don't make it complicated. It'll just become a mess. So after doing PR and media for almost 8 years now, I've been very lucky. I have some wonderful clients, but I miss the storytelling. And I really feel like there's a possibility and there is a need to make an impact. And I love helping women. I went to an all-girls school, high school. I went to an all-women's college. My biggest supporters, my biggest mentors, my best friends have been women. So I wanted to start something that hopefully could become a platform where women help and support other women by sharing their stories. So I named it Smart, Strong, Sassy. Part of it's aspirational, because we all want to be smart, strong, sassy, and part of it is because every woman who I've ever admired always possesses those qualities. She is smart, she is strong, and we all have a little bit of sass in us. So Smart, Strong, Sassy. And as I started it, a lot of times, like, I would walk into a meeting and it became my internal mantra. I'm smart, strong, sassy. I'm smart, strong, sassy. I can do this. I'm smart, strong, sassy. And I started to believe it, and it is catching on. So I love the name, and it's been going really well. We did a soft launch about 3 months ago, and we're starting to get a lot of attention. And while I love the messaging and the branding, I do want to share one more story about don't take yourself too seriously, because it'll catch up with you. I had an opportunity to go with my girlfriend to Venice, and we decided we would do a photo shoot, and we'd get all this visual content for Smart, Strong, Sassy. And so we took these amazing pictures, and I posted this one on social media where I was thinking, oh man, look at that. My hair looks good, I'm having a good hair day, I've got the shades, I'm in Venice, I am so cool. Of course, what I posted was, yeah. So I was wondering, like, why is everyone saying I'm an ass on social media? So I had to crop the photo. So the moral of that story, the lesson learned there is don't take yourself too seriously and learn from your mistakes. So that's almost it for the slides of my presentation, but I want to conclude by just saying thank you, and I really appreciate your time, and I'm honored for everyone that has shared their stories. I've been just overwhelmed sometimes in a positive way with how it's taking off, and recently someone said, did you see that post on Facebook that had a hashtag Smart, Strong, Sassy? And I was like, no. And it was a woman who was going to the hospital. It was actually in the waiting room at the hospital, and she was going in to have a double mastectomy that day. And she had bought a sweatshirt on the website. I didn't know her, but she felt like it gave her power, and she felt like it gave her strength, and she chose to wear Smart, Strong, Sassy to go in on one of the worst days of her life. And to me, that just meant like, oh my goodness, we're giving strength to women. We've got to keep doing this because it's important, and it's an important message. So before I conclude, I just want to ask you guys, what makes you smart, strong, sassy? We all have different things that make us smart, strong, sassy. And for me, it might be, learning from my journey and not making the same mistake with the shirt, or not dating guys named Stuart anymore. But we all have different things in our lives and our journeys that make us smart, strong, sassy. So I want you to just take a moment and think about, what is it that makes you smart? Maybe it was buying a ticket to this conference today. What is it that makes you strong? It could be that you worked out today. It could be that you bought a book. I was talking to a woman recently who lost her son to a drunk driver, and she was telling me that the hardest part of her day is when she wakes up in the morning and has to make that decision to pull the covers off herself and take one step out of the bed and the next step out of the bed. So sometimes for people, it could just be the fact that they got up. It could be anything to anybody. And then, what is it that makes you sassy? We all have something that makes us sassy. So I'd love for you guys to think about it, and if you have any questions or comments or feedback, I would love to hear from you. If you have any stories, I would love to hear them. And if you have a moment and don't mind following us on Instagram at Smart, Strong, Sassy, or Facebook, we would certainly appreciate that as well. We could use your support. So thank you for your time, and I encourage you to be the best version of your smart, strong, sassy self.